Good morning, everybody.
Good morning and welcome to Dordrecht. Today we celebrate 6 years of hard work by European cities and research institutes. They've tried to make their cities much more livable using nature-based solutions. And today we also try to build the projects of the future, so finding out what is the next level, what are the challenges still remaining. We do that with you here in the beautiful Energy House in Dordrecht. We'll be over 100 people in the room here today. And we do that with you online. We will have more than 200 people. So actually you were still registering last night, so thank you for that. So pure hybrid conference. For us, that's the first time. So bear with us. Let's make it a success together. My name is Sebastiaan van Herk. I'm here together with Sofia Ivarsson. We will be your hosts today. We've supported the BEGIN project of the Interreg North Sea region program in their coordination externally. But today we'll talk you through the day and to be inspired as much as we can. Sofia, can you explain us how the online environment will look today?
So welcome everybody from me as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. Yes, this is a hybrid event, so we will interact with you online and with you here, we have you in person. So we have this network app, so everybody's logged in there. You can also, people who are here can log in there and interact with everybody. So we want to make this interaction as lively as possible. So you can use the chat, you can talk to each other, you can network and talk directly to each other, and send us questions for the speakers that we'll have here. So we will expect some questions typed in and also some questions from the audience directly. And yes, Sebastiaan, tell us about the program and this box there.
So for the people in the room, we got this catch box. So you catch the box and then you can speak. If you don't have a catch box, you can't speak. So if you want to speak, you please stand up. And the first one, I will throw the box to you. And after that, you will share the box. Yeah, shall we practice that for a moment? So I will just throw the box in the room. I'm not a good thrower. So whoever catches it, pass it on.
Wow.
So if that happens, that doesn't matter. So then you stand up.
I stand up.
And you speak in the box.
Like this.
Yes.
Now everyone can hear me.
So if you want to speak next, you look at the person with the box, and that's when you're on. You want to say something, sir?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Dordrecht.
Okay. So a bit about the program. The morning is more, it's meant to be inspirational, whereas the afternoon is a bit more informal where we build projects. So we start with speeches by the Alderman, our host of the City of Dordrecht. He is the senator of Hamburg. After that, we'll have a talk show. That's also the first time for us. So we'll have people on stage from cities and experts. Experts will present on greening, climate, water, and these things, and art and creative thinking. And then cities will reflect on what these experts say. That's kind of a talk show. Then again, we will look at your questions online. We will use the catch box then to get this going. After the talk show, we'll go out in workshops. If you're here in the room, or in the building, we have separate rooms where there'll be workshops. Online, you will also be facilitators. You have professional facilitators, both online and here. And also you have city representatives telling their stories, interacting with you, what they come across in practice. So also the workshops are completely hybrid. There will be interaction between the online people and here in Dordrecht. So, without further ado, let's start the program with the more inspirational part and speakers. Sofia, who's the first speaker?
So we have the pleasure to invite here to the stage the Alderman of the City of Dordrecht, Herk van der Linden, who will talk about the City of Dordrecht, of course, and he will he will let us know what is the next level on livability. So, dear Alderman, please take the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Dordrecht, and you've raised the bar already because I've heard I've got to be inspirational 2 times already in 2 minutes. I'll give it a try. It's very nice to be here, and I welcome you very much to the City of Dordrecht. I hope you have some time to visit the city, to see the surroundings, and I also want to compliment you for a very nice program. I've been asked to talk a little bit about history. And when I say a little bit, I mean 600 years. And when Dutch people talk about history, it's not about kings or knights or wars. It's about water, mud, and trade. That's all of our history. First, a glass of water. I'll give you the first glimpse of Dordrecht. You've seen that. For centuries, life in Dordrecht has been strongly linked to weather conditions. Like many large cities, we're familiar with heat stress, which threatens biodiversity and the health of the inhabitants. In addition, or actually mainly, life in our city is determined by water. There you have it, water. It's not working.
It's in front of you.
No. Yeah, in front of me, but not in front of the people.
Yeah.
Now it is. Yeah, that's a disaster. It has been taken 600 years ago. It's called the St. Elizabeth's Flood. One of the worst floods in our history, inundated the southwest of the Netherlands. Many villages disappeared underwater. Survivors sought safety within the city walls of Dordrecht, the part we now call the historic city center. The St. Elizabeth's Flood had enormous consequences for the wealthy city of Dordrecht. In the Netherlands, we had a golden age between 1600 and 1700. The golden age of Dordrecht was already between, let's say, 1350 and the St. Elizabeth's Flood in 1421. The city lost its hinterland then. What you see now, the tiny dark spots on the left upside, that's Dordrecht, and everything blue is water. That was a consequence of the St. Elizabeth's Flood. Before 1421, it was all land, so we had a very good position. The city lost its hinterland and became an island. Before the flood, Dordrecht earned a lot of money with the so-called staple right. Ships bound for other destinations had to pass along Dordrecht and pay tax here for their goods. Well, as you can see, after the flood, ships could sail past Dordrecht, wave-friendly, and so avoid the staple right. And as a result, the city lost its strategic trading position and part of its wealth. Well, I told you Dutch history is mainly about trade, water and mud. We'll get to the mud part now, because in the centuries that followed, Dordrecht developed again into an enterprising and prosperous city. Dikes and bridges were built, and polders were drained. Willow forestry and salmon fishing became good sources of income. Shipping, shipbuilding, and the dredging industry grew to great importance. The city rises as the island of Dordrecht. Left upper hand, you see the situation around 1500, and right on the lower page, it's the actual city today. And there you have it. This is Dordrecht at the moment. A lot of nature, a lot of green, but also a city consisting of 120,000 inhabitants. Now, 600 years later, Dordrecht is still vulnerable, especially when the water rises. Together with our partners, we've been working for 16 years on a flood risk management approach that is different for the Netherlands. This is based on the fact that extreme situations can occur. A storm that causes water to overflow the dike. Now, what you see here is not a dike. Most part of the Netherlands are safeguarded by dikes. Of course, we have a very beautiful waterfront. We can build dikes here, but it would scare off the tourists. So we're very proud of the beautiful city we have, and you can protect yourself from water in another way. The development of a new flood risk management approach in Dordrecht has been part of various Interreg North Sea region projects over the past 13 years. This picture is very famous. It was one of the very few moments Dordrecht was on the front page of CNN. And I don't know the headline anymore, but it was something along the lines of problems, disaster, floods in the Netherlands. Well, as you can see, this man is not very happy because his cellar has been flooded and part of his house is underwater. But you also see that he's standing there in a safe position. We protect our country by dikes, but we also, this house has been standing there for 400 years already, or even more. The walls are thick, the glass is protected. So he can stay here. It's a safe place to be. Last summer's situation in the south of the Netherlands, in Belgium and Germany, where extremely heavy rainfall also led to flooding with terrible consequences, shows what can happen. What to do if the water comes over the dike? What if the worst flood imaginable happens again, just like 600 years ago? And of course you can say, well, that was 600 years ago, but every Dutchman gets the notion that somewhere in his or her lifetime, it's possible that you have to get away from your house, because a large part of the Netherlands is below sea level. My house is 5 meters below sea level. My house is 8 meters high, so I can go upstairs. But my father and mother-in-law, they had to flee. And my grandfather also had to flee once in his lifetime. So it's a situation we all have to bear in mind. In Dordrecht we have 120,000 people, and most of the city is below sea level. But there's a part of Dordrecht that remains dry in the event of a major flood. It's this part of the city, the district and island, de staart, the tail. It's got something of a tail there. Facilities such as electricity and drinking water will remain available. This makes this district the perfect place to develop as a large-scale shelter to evacuate residents in the event of a flood. At the same time, our city is growing, and we have a task to build more homes. The staart is not only situated higher, the district is also attractive because of its location between the historic city center and the Biesbos National Park. In the past year, the municipality of Dordrecht and the International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam, the IABR, have investigated how the staart can develop into a shelter for residents and at the same time be an attractive neighborhood for pleasant and healthy living and working. Building new homes on the staart is not enough for the growth of the city in the coming years. Houses must also be built in the urban area of the island of Dordrecht. But the urban area is not getting any bigger, and more homes and therefore more bricks should not be at the expense of a healthy living environment. The corona pandemic has shown that there is great need for nature and space for cycling and walking close to home. So, how can Dordrecht provide space for 10,000 additional inhabitants, or 10,000 additional homes and 20,000 additional inhabitants, and at the same time be attractive, green and healthy for residents and nature, and reduce potential damage from climate change? The transformation of the Dordwijk zone, and you see the green line along the city, that's the Dordwijk zone, into a city park XXL, offers that possibility. With green space for residents and opportunities for entrepreneurs, a large green park for recreation and socializing, with space for culture and sports, and with great benefits for nature and the climate. In addition, we will work together with the residents in their neighborhoods to make also their immediate surroundings more green. Thanks to BEGIN, we were able to set both major developments into motion. For the future, we look to the past. History has forced Dordrecht on an island. We built it ourselves, but it's still an island. It is also below sea level. For centuries, we have successfully protected ourselves from the water and built a prosperous and economically strong city on that island. That growth continues, and climate change is forcing us to prepare the city for the consequences, heat and flooding. It requires a renewed approach and innovative solutions. Next level solutions in which nature and people in our city live together in a safe and healthy way. That's the challenge facing us in Dordrecht in the next 10 years. Thank you very much and have a nice and inspiring program today.
Thank you, Mr. Alderman, and compliments for leading this project on blue-green infrastructure and social innovation. You explained a lot about the flood risk also from the river, but also I know that you do a lot with your citizens in the work with them in actually greening on a smaller scale the neighborhoods, and you have you will get a park bigger than Central Park. I thank you very much. We don't have time for a question right now. I don't know if you're happy to stay along. We will also have a walking tour at lunchtime, so you can see all the pictures that the Alderman showed you. Yeah. I would now like to go to your peer, the Senator of the City of Hamburg, Dr. Anjes Tjarks, who will join us online. As you see, we will have speakers here and online, so I hope he connects. In the meantime, I will introduce him. I want to say that Hamburg really took it to the next level. When we invited Hamburg to join this international project, again, Hamburg is very active in such international collaboration. We try to invite a leading water agency. So we've been working with a leading water agency, but over the last 4 or 5 years and under the political leadership of Dr. Tjarks, they kind of started combining water, greening, mobility. So it became much more of an integrated, a visionary approach. So if the senator is with us, then Dr. Tjarks, we'd love to hear more of your vision and how you turned this around. Take it away.
Oh, this is Sebastiaan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a warm welcome from Hamburg. I actually wanted to introduce myself as well, but before that I wanted to start a presentation, but the host is denying me to do so, so if you kind of would give me a little help here. I can't share the presentation, but I see two pictures of mine in the screen, which is quite weird.
Mr. Senator, may I invite you to give a sort of a speech or explain the challenges Hamburg is now facing, where you're working on, and meanwhile the technical people will try to get your presentation online.
Yeah, well, more or less I'm trying to do this, and but it's much easier if I'm supported with some pictures. But however, dear Sebastiaan, dear Mr. Alderman, dear people in the room and on the screens, I'm very pleased and delighted to be with you today, because we are all facing more or less the same target. And as the Alderman said, that Dordrecht is built on, what was it, trade, water and mud. I think I can agree with this for Hamburg, the place as well. More or less, I'm the senator for traffic, and then I'm always saying that the true reason why Hamburg as a city exists is more or less traffic and maybe trade. It seems a bit more fanciful to say it's trade, but more or less it is traffic, and at the same time we're facing the same problems. The Alderman addressed the thing about climate change and the question how we come around with floods, and not only, or more or less the floods we are facing, more or less with the floods from the North Sea, but more or less we have increasing problems coming from heavy rain in the city. And
Mr. Senator, I heard that you can share your screen. The technical people whispered in my ear that you have the ability to share your screen.
Yes, I do have so I'm trying now. Say it this way. So the question is if you can see something.
Yes. Yes, just continue talking, but you now have the images to go with it.
So I'm just, let's say, and therefore since we're facing all these problems coming from heavy rain and climate change, we are not only trying to learn from the Netherlands in many ways and from many other European cities, and therefore I myself not only called Minister or Senator for Traffic, but also for mobility transition, meaning that we're not only trying to organize our traffic, but also giving it an official direction, and the direction is mobility transition and less cars. And at the same time, we noticed also taking part in this project here, we noticed that we want to not only change the mobility, but also to implement a new vision calling blue-green infrastructure, and to find out what is the potential in our city within the fighting of climate change and the mobility transition. The short agenda I've brought to you here is just from the vision to implementation, and then I have two pilot projects I wanted to show to you. One is the green streets and the filtering, and the other one is the green streets and the retention. And to start off, it's always good to connect like you're doing here. Today we had some workshops and subsequent internal discussion that led to rethinking the planning of retention measures and runoff filtering. Also, the need for communication among the stakeholders became evident, so roundtables on topics of urban water management are permanently installed, and from this point on, a virtuous circle is created comprising knowledge gain and exchange, promotion of multi-purpose urban planning solutions, and multiple benefits for citizens and stakeholders. And I want to point out with the two pilots I've brought to you what are the benefits in our city at least. But before I do this, I come to this little booklet that was created within the project between the different good practice examples in the different cities. And here we have 21 examples of blue-green infrastructure throughout Europe you can see and also enjoy if you want to get inspired. So to come to the first example in a street so-called Hohe Straße, here we have a project or a pilot that is concerned with filtering water in the meantime, and for this we had the idea that we have lots of talk around before we implemented the projects, and to come to the project as itself, it more or less looks like this. You see left to the bottom how it looked some years ago, and on the top how it's supposed to look in the end. It's the entrance of a city park in Harburg, a southern district of Hamburg, and the idea is that we have here stormwater retention, and the good thing is that it's not only much better in terms of biodiversity, in terms of just a greener and more livable place, but it's also, and this is the important point here I wanted to make, is that this project outperformed the grey or the traditional grey infrastructure in an economic way. So we have the grey infrastructure in a 10 years time would have cost 1.6 times as much as the blue-green infrastructure in this respect, and therefore we do not only have gains on for the environment, for the citizens, but also for our household, and therefore you can see that there are lots of reasons to go on, not only with a pilot, but with a regular implementation of such a project. Then I come to the other project I wanted to show to you here is the project Königstraße. Here we have the topic of streets and retention and the prevention of heat waves. The whole thing is embedded in the idea of mobility transition. Here you can see different streets in the district of Altona in Hamburg, where we wanted to implement new bikeways. And within these bikeways on the blue street, this is Königstraße, we implement also the blue-green infrastructure. What we do here at the same time is that, you see it comes to the point here where you see the red circle. This is the Königstraße you see here, and at the red circle, we built a new school campus visited by more than 2,000 students each day, and therefore we have a heavy impact also for the young population in this project. And what you can also see here is, well, this is the school campus, that we have a newly built city quarter, the so-called Trinitatis quarter around the church, and at the same time we have a park here, and which goes from north to south, and at the same time, I don't know if you can see my mouse, we have in this area here on the left side, we have another park. So with the green infrastructure, we can also build kind of a path for animals to come on a green infrastructure from park to park. So what happens here is that we'll have lots of benefits. We'll save the water from the roofs and bring them to the trees so they can drink during heating periods. We'll have 40% more trees afterwards. We have a reducing of parking lots by 70%. We have much more cooling during hot summer days. And all in all, also here, this project will start in the end of next year. We'll have probably an infrastructure which is much more livable for the citizens, which is much greener, which is in many ways better, and therefore for the city-owned propaganda, we call it the street of the future, because it's not supposed to be the only street where we wanted to implement the blue-green infrastructure. Those were the two pilots and the general ideas I wanted to point out to you, but more or less I also wanted to point out to you it's very important to learn from each other from these projects on days like these. So please be a little bit inspired by us, but we also want to be inspired by you further on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tjarks. Very interesting, very nice insights from the city of Hamburg. We'd like now, we have 5 minutes for some questions, so we'd like to ask here the audience if you have a few questions, one question maybe or two. And you already see online, we have a question for you from Liz Sharp. She's finding your presentation very interesting, and especially what you're saying about the project outperforming grey infrastructure. So it would be great if you can say, it would be great to know what the savings and the key differences were. Can you reflect on that, please?
Yeah. The main thing is that you more or less have to build lots of grey infrastructure to handle the water as well. And actually, this is the main difference, that the traditional infrastructure also costs lots of money, and sometimes even more, especially in the how do you say it in English? The pipes have to be larger, and therefore you have to also invest more money. Maybe some people are also from Hamburg in the room and can help me with the details a bit.
Thank you for that. Maybe there are people from Hamburg in the room, then you can get the catch box. So can someone stand up who has the catch box? Someone from Hamburg stand up and you catch it. Well, that was easy. Yeah. Maybe stand up, speak into the box as it were a microphone.
My name is Stefan Kratz from LSBG.
Closer to your mouth, probably.
Lisha posed very detailed questions, so I will try to answer. The cost-benefit analysis, yes, yielded saving by 1.6, the factor. And what Liz wanted to know is probably how it was assessed or how we did it. It was a simple comparison between few designs and calculation, so there's no BGI benefit or let's say this amenities included. It's just the pure cost of a lifetime for maintenance and construction, and the additional benefits are not monetarized in this case study.
So it's even better,
yes.
Probably. Other people in the room that would like to ask a question to the senator before he leaves, then you can catch the box. No? Sophia, maybe you have a question?
We have another question. It's coming from Chris Digman, and he's asking if you can briefly mention what are the discussions with the community in terms of losing parking space. It's a bit, it's a nice question that everybody has, so just a brief insight.
Well, I think it's in every city it's the same discussion. I have to say, probably, but obviously, since we had an election in 2020, and I'm a member of the Green Party, and we gained 24%, and therefore we reorganized the idea of traffic. As I told in the beginning, I'm saying that we're not only organizing it, but we're organizing in a direction. And the key about parking lots is that we're actually not talking that much about losing parking lots, but we're more talking about saying what we're doing. I mean, just to give you an example, if you want to build a wide bikeway, I don't know, 3 meters wide, usually you need to have some space, and sometimes it's the parking lot. Then we're not talking that much about losing parking lots, but building a new bikeway, and the same here, we're building a new infrastructure where the city is getting much greener, much more livable, much better, and therefore we're talking about this. So actually we're talking about the offerings and not so much about the losses.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Mr. Senator. I think politicians are, of course, very skilled in the narrative, and it's something we also figured out in our project. The storytelling is important, and I don't say it with irony, I really believe that. So thank you for your vision in combining all these elements and telling your citizens a story and why this is a good idea. Thank you very much. This will be the end of the presentations by the politicians. We will then move on to the talk show. So I will ask on the stage, I will explain how it works, but I will ask the people that are supposed to reflect, which are cities. There's from the city of Antwerp, Lien Engels. May I ask her on stage? From the city of Bergen in Norway, Magnar Sekse. and from our host city, the City of Dordrecht, Ellen Kelder. Have a seat. What we will do is we will have experts presenting to you on various topics. The first will be on greening with examples and climate examples from Ghent. After that, we get a presentation from McKenna Davis on governance, also very important, how to work together between different stakeholders. Then we move on to Paul Sayers. He will be online. He's a flood expert, so more from the water side, gives a presentation. And we end with something which I also find very intriguing, more from the design thinking, art, cultural side. We'll have Jens Thomas Ivarsson presenting. And then the cities will reflect from their experience in practice. So we try to keep this grounded in practice. Keep the questions going. Thank you, Sophia. You see, she actually picks them up. We will do our best for that. There's a bit lag between the streaming online and what's happening here in the venue. Bear with us, but it's just a few seconds, I think. So, welcome, everybody. I will give you the floor later. You have the time to reflect on what your colleagues will be saying. So, I want to start with, who's the first?
Our first guest is Eva Naessens, an environmental advisor from the city of Ghent. We had to make a small change for the program, so we really thank Eva for jumping on our program and contributing with their experiences from Ghent. And well, Eva is very experienced in urban planning, greening and climate change, and she will tell us all about their experiences on making livable Ghent. So, yes, thank you.
Can I have the box?
Of course.
It will help. Okay, just over here. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eva Naessens. I work for the City of Ghent, and there I work in a team that follows spatial planning, but from the perspective of environment and climate. In Ghent, we have a climate plan where there are a lot of actions about climate mitigation. We want to produce as less CO2 as possible, but there's also a part on climate adaptation, because we already notice for the moment that Ghent is getting warmer, wetter, and drier. It's getting warmer approximately by 8 to 10 degrees hotter on a summer's eve in the city center compared to the outskirts. It's getting wetter. We get wetter winters, but also peak showers in summer that have a big impact on the sewage system. But it's also getting drier. The heat spells are occurring more frequently and are during longer. And we really see the impact on the green in the city. We're also convinced that climate change doesn't have to be doom and gloom, that we can reinvent the city in a way to make it more livable, to make it a much more pleasant place to stay, even during heat waves or rainfalls. And we do that, in short, by assuring that there's less gray and more green and blue in the city. So by implementing nature-based solutions from small scale to large scale, because you need to implement it on different levels. On a city level, we made sure, but we started on that more than 20 years ago, that there were green poles. These are large green areas, over 200 square kilometers of green. There are 5 of them around the city to make sure that every Ghentian can reach such a larger green area where it's pleasant to stay, where it's cooler during heat waves and things like that. The last 10 years, we added to that green climate axes. Those are 8 climate axes that connect those larger green spaces to the inner city center. The goal is there that people who live in the city center can reach those green poles more easily by bike or by foot, but also that the cooler air from the greener areas finds its way into the city, because a lot of those green climate axes are also realized alongside the rivers that are an important part of Ghent. When we descend to the level of neighborhoods, more green and blue means they're adding more neighborhood parks. They have to be at least 1 hectare large, and we aim to realize such a neighborhood park for every Ghentian on 400 meters from his house. We're not there yet, but we have a plan to get there. Measurements in those neighborhoods can also mean reopening water flows that were covered up during the 60s and 70s, and now we give them space again. We make water very present in each neighborhood. When you then go to the street level, it means more simple things like adding more trees or providing space for a rain garden and things like that. And on a street level, you can look for more connection with the people because, for instance, these trees or the rain gardens, they can put in some plants of their own, or they can help and design the rain garden together with the city. And then the last level is a level of a single building, a house or a company. That's where you really have to address people, that they have to do their part. All the other things are measurements that are mainly the responsibility of the city. But when you descend to the level of the house, you really have to address people and confront them with their own responsibility, and that it can mean changing their private parking space into a green front yard, for instance, or installing a rain water level, things like that. For the things we have to implement as a city, it's important to implement it in a lot of visions, strategic documents, because a lot of these plans take 20 years or more to implement, and we have to make sure that we keep the goals in mind and that we get there, but it goes very, very slowly. But you can see already some results in the city. For instance, the left corner was an old factory, a textile factory. We have lots of them in Ghent, with a lot of pollution in the soil, but we changed it into a green park with place for water. The first plans were made up 20 years ago. The park is now there for 5 years, and we still have to wait for the housing that will be put in, that will be realized in the coming years. It can also mean working together, for instance, with a public transport company, to ask them, if you put in a tramway, put it in a green space, not in a gray space. For them, it's a very big change. We really have to fight for that. It takes us a few years more to implement the tramway, but we get there in the end. So it's a slow process. And the picture on the right hand, you see a green climate tax that is already realized. It's the one to the Ghent-Brugse Meersen. That's the one that it's mostly completed. And for a lot of these actions, as I mentioned, you have to confront people with their own responsibility, but there we look for partnerships. Partnerships, for instance, with nature organizations. In Ghent, we have what's called a Geveltuinbrigade. This kind of a green gang that comes along in the city and helps people to realize a green facade garden. So these are very small steps, but for people, it's a pleasant change in their street, and it helps them to come to terms with the bigger changes that we want on a city level, because otherwise we end up in only discussions about parking places. That's the same everywhere, also in Ghent. But you see that step by step you can realize change. That's it.
Thank you so much, Eva. And it's really true, I called her last night, so Robert Snap had some personal circumstances, so we wish him all the best. But you jumped in the car at 5 a.m. this morning, so some flights were in Dutch, and that's forgiven. So thank you for coming. Finally, we had cities reflecting on experts, and Lien from City of Antwerp, so now you can reflect on your neighboring city, rival city, friend city.
Friend city.
What do you do in Antwerp? How do you see her approaches? What can you learn from her, and how is it sometimes different for you?
I think, first of all, very interesting presentation, Eva. I think you're doing a lot of effort in Ghent in terms of greening the city and making it more climate adaptive. I think I can also, being in the same country with the same geographical situation, very much relate to the threats, but also to the challenges. And we have a little bit of the same approach. I think we're working on different levels. On the more higher level, zoomed out, we have a water plan, we have a green plan, so we really want these large green and blue structures to be realized. So we also have plans on reopening old waterways. We want to have a large green-blue axis. But we also zoom in. I think the neighborhood level is also a very interesting level to work on and to work on your ambitions. And we have pilot projects such as the garden streets, where we work on street level. So we now have 4 garden streets already realized, and we have about 20 more to go in the next coming years. In these garden streets, we want to green and blue as much as possible, and it's not only to inspire policymakers that this is the way to go, to inspire residents, to engage residents and enhance social cohesion, but it's also a way of changing our internal process, actually, and to really force our own designers and our own engineers to think differently in designing the public space. And using new materials and thinking about climate change. So I think it's good to work on these different levels and to.
Thank you, Lien. Anyone in the audience? Jens, can I ask you to pick up the catch box? And can you just, yeah, there's someone. Please stand up, catch the box, say who you are, and then.
Rick Heijnen from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Waterstaat, previously also Dordrecht. Eva, I had a question for you. I know in Ghent and I think Flanders on its whole, there is a much stricter water regulations for what people have to do in their own homes than comparison, at least with the Netherlands. I'm curious, does that also change the discussions that you have with the citizens on the larger greener projects in the city? Does that make it easier or harder, or do they say, well, we already are doing what we're doing in our backyard, why do you also have to lose my parking spot? Or curious.
I don't think that it changes the discussion that much, because these rules, they are implied with new buildings. A lot of the city is existing buildings. And they always have the feeling that they have to give up a lot of things before they get something in change. And it's important to show them that the situation will be different in 10, 15 years. 10, 15 years is a period that they can still imagine, I think. And if you can show them this will be the change in your street or in your neighborhood, and that's why it's important that you do your small thing, they get it, but it's not by changing legislation that you can convince them in an existing situation that it's important. Because, as I mentioned, the discussions about parking is still very much alive.
Thank you. Rick, keep the catch box. I'll get back to you. I'll rely on you to throw to the next person. But Sophia, do we have any questions from our online participants?
Yes, we have a question from Louise Walker from the UK. She's interested in the person or organization that helps people to green their streets. Can you tell us something more about this?
Yeah. We do it in different ways. Some of the actions we give financial support. For instance, we had an action in a certain neighborhood where we implemented 53 of these facade gardens in one weekend. Then we helped them financially to buying some plants, but also practically. We make sure that there are some specialists there, that there's a shovel and things like that, so they can work in the ground and that they can get some advice on the spot. These are practical things. As I mentioned, the Nature's organization that we work with together is very important, because that's we launched it, I think, about 5 years ago, and that's they can handle a constant flood of demand on adding extra facade gardens. They don't depend on one weekend that we want to build up a big action. They can do it steadily but surely. So we're over, I don't know, I think 1,500 facade gardens in a few years now. And not all of them work together with this Nature's organization. People just copy what they see a lot of the times. So when you have a certain amount of facade gardens, lots of people get inspired and do it themselves.
That's a good lesson. Thank you. So copying each other.
Yep.
Cities want to learn from cities. Citizens want to do what their neighbors are doing,
Yep.
right? So thank you. Any other last burning question from the room? And to give Rick a job? No? Then last reflection here for the city of Ghent. Magnar or Ellen? Magnar.
Well, I think it's very interesting to hear about the trees and the parking problems that were raised, because we just have had a new program for planting more trees in the city of Bergen, and it is written a lot about it in the newspapers. But we also have a new initiative, what we call a city farmer, who is an advisor for people who wants to make roof gardens, to grow vegetables at that one. And they also go to schools and help them making small gardens in schools. And that is also a good thing for water. You just have to connect.
Thank you. Well, Eva, thank you very much, especially you for all the last minute, flying in, driving in. Thank you. Sophia, maybe you can introduce the next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Eva. Our next speaker is McKenna Davis. She's a fellow from Ecologic Institute in Germany. We have her with us here online, so you can see her on screen. She's an expert on greening, governance. She's dealing with complexity and policy making, so she has a lot of expertise, especially in collaborations. So we would like to hear what she has to share with us today. So McKenna, please take the floor.
Thanks a lot. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yes,
Perfect.
we do.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Also very grateful that we have this hybrid event. I love the format, and I'm very happy to be able to say hi to you all from Berlin today. So very good morning. As was introduced, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about governance and policy. We have a lot of city experts sitting around at the table. I'm coming more from the research perspective. So happy to hear the city's thoughts afterwards as well. And I have a 5-minute time limit, so I hope to stick to the time. So next slide, please. So where are we at right now, and what do we know? I think we've heard a lot of interesting inputs already so far today, but just to take a more meta level in the beginning, we all know that urban nature-based solutions governments really crosses a lot of interest, which leads to very complex management and decision-making processes. It's underlined by trade-offs and the challenges in assessing those trade-offs and balancing them within these decision-making processes, and really raises the need for a cross-sectoral coordination and a diverse mix of policies in order to really have participation and the various perspectives integrated within the actual design and implementation of the nature-based solutions. So within that context, the last one, please. Within that context, there's many different types of policy instruments available, and they all have a little bit different opportunities or degrees of opportunities for public participation. We've heard some interesting examples from Ghent already, but also having implications for power sharing and decision making. And this ranges from more top-down, more regulatory instruments or some economic instruments to more bottom-up instruments like agreement-based or cooperation instruments, or knowledge and communication instruments for awareness raising. So next slide, please. So we all know there's no one-size-fits-all approach. This is really context-specific, location-specific, actor-specific, and also challenge-specific, what the different cities and contexts are dealing with. But universally, there's evidence to support the role of different stakeholders and having their involvement in varying degrees. So I just list a couple here. The really core foundation of successful MBS governance is really working on partnerships and collaboration. So having these multi-stakeholder forms of MBS governance, and also from the governments and their agencies, really establishing these kind of framework conditions for enabling action and delivering nature-based solutions, whether those are delivered directly through the cities and the public institutions, or whether that is supporting the diverse actors in their own initiatives. Then, of course, following that, there's the citizens, civil society groups, businesses, and wider actors who are really kind of critical players within implementation, but also increasingly in financing NBS as well. And this is more supporting a bottom-up NBS governance. And then kind of underlying or crossing over all of those categories, you have these political actors and champions who can be both within and outside of the government, who are really kind of the lighthouses spearheading the awareness of and passion for and drive for these nature-based solutions, policies and regulatory frameworks. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to focus too much on the key challenges and gaps. I think we're all familiar. I would like to focus more on solutions. This is called Next Level, so really moving up to how to move forward. But I just wanted to highlight three that I find to be particularly relevant within the governance context. So one of those is about the ongoing competition for land use. We all know that land is a limited resource. There's an increasing trend towards urbanization and densification. You have to balance the private investors versus public interests, reconcile power struggles. You have the short versus long-term and economic versus other priorities, which are all competing with one another. So that's one aspect. Then there's also, in terms of more methodological approaches, there's challenges to really consider and take into account trade-offs and different perspectives and values and considerations within actual decision-making processes, but also regarding the design and the evaluation of NBS. And in particular, one aspect going with the theme of this conference I'd like to highlight is really the challenges in trying to address and assess the equity and justice aspects within planning and decision-making processes as well for wider stakeholders. Then the final one, which maybe is the most central to my work, is really about the largely inadequate public governance structures and policy frameworks. There's really a lot of very good examples out there of initiatives that are taking place being really participatory and multi-stakeholder, but in general, across institutions, across different sectors, there hasn't been as large of a mainstreaming and uptake of nature-based solutions as is potential. There's also this kind of inherent path dependency, so do as always has been done, which tends to kind of block innovation and experimentation, which is definitely highly desired in the context of nature-based solutions. And there's this continued siloed sectored approach where each sector works independently towards its goals and its top priorities, rather than looking at kind of the potential for shared cross-cutting collaboration. So looking at, for example, biodiversity together with climate, together with human health and well-being, which can all be quite complementary in the context of multifunctional nature-based solutions. So next slide, please. But I don't really want to focus on the challenges, as I said. I want to really highlight just a couple of ideas about where to go from here or looking forward. So the main thing that I want to highlight is that there's really a need for governance innovation, but not only that, also learning from the really many and very prevalent good examples that exist across Europe and across the world, actually. Some of these have to do with overarching city strategies. Some of them have to do with very specific instruments. Maybe we'll have time to talk a little more about those later. But what I wanted to highlight is three approaches to governance, which I would really encourage. So one of these is more inclusive governance. I think this is the most straightforward. It really follows the IUCN Global NBS standard, which really emphasizes the need to move away from top-down decision-making and empower local stakeholders to really actively participate in decision-making, to involve a range of non-governmental actors, also to include vulnerable and disadvantaged communities and really make special efforts to do so. And importantly, to formalize citizen participation and not just have, let's say, a loose framework where there's more consultative practices every once in a while, which are conducted. So the second one would be about reflexive governance. Here, we really encourage the integration of different types of actors, again, to engage in this kind of continuous and iterative reflective process. So it's really about learning and readjusting the institutions and the practices themselves. It's about making incremental shifts, so not everything done at once, but really a more, let's say, awake and conscious view of what is working, how do we define our problems, how do we formulate our goals, how do we implement our strategies, and what do we need to change? And taking these incremental shifts, adapting and responding to local needs can really foster this kind of transformational change, which is critical right now. And then finally, the last one is polycentric governance, which basically means to have novel arrangements in public administration which involve different levels. So it's not only working on a single level, but really looking across institutional scales and across sectors. So it's really trying to provide more opportunities for learning, for experimentation, It helps to respond quickly to challenges and to needs by sharing the governance across these different scales and sectors. And then also to foster collaboration to work together towards these shared agendas, what I was saying before, like biodiversity and climate, for example. So these are a couple very quick introduction. I hope we have more time to discuss. I also, on the next slide, list some resources. I don't think there's time to go into them now, but my work is mostly on Horizon 2020 projects, so European funded projects, now Horizon Europe. And here I just wanted to provide a selection of resources which could be interesting to you. And hopefully we have time to talk about some of them more afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, McKenna. And as you suggested at the beginning, we'll bring this theory down to practice. I would like Ellen Kelder, City of Dordrecht, to reflect. Ellen Kelder is the Challenge Manager Blue-Green. I already love that title. Also compliments to the City of Dordrecht, who has a political program called the Blue-Green City, so that already helps. Particularly, I think your experience on the inclusiveness and empowerment of citizens. In Dordrecht, you had a very successful project in the Vogelbuurt, which was in our video. You will get videos of all the cities later. But Ellen, maybe you can reflect on how to do inclusive governance or other challenges, how you've done this in practice.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastiaan. Thank you, McKenna. That's very interesting. Yeah, we have a pilot where we work on the issues McKenna addressed. And I think we are just trying to learn from there. It's indeed in the Vogelbuurt. We are having a large maintenance issue work with sewerage and road. And our vision is nearly what, in large way, what Eva told us. You have a vision on what you want in general. So our Alderman already told you that we want this large green area to be developed, and it is adjacent to the Vogelbuurt. And you want a very small green park nearby every neighborhood. And the Vogelbuurt doesn't have one. But in the adjacent sports park, there is room. So the sport clubs suggested we can do without one field and make it a recreational area. So looking for stakeholders, we started at that sports park. And actually all these sport clubs are interested in helping out. So this started in 2018, just when we started in BEGIN. And in the Vogelbuurt, this project started, and our vision is that you can bring a park, a green area, to the square, and with a green line. And that actually that street that connects the square to that green park is that's what we do our maintenance. So we are bringing in the public domain more green, but there's also gardens, and it's a socially disadvantaged neighborhood with a lot of social housing. So another stakeholder is the housing corporation, and they are unbelievably helpful in all this and participating. So when you ask just generally on the public, do you want a green garden? No one's replying. You really have to go door to door. So what we have is a foundation, a workplace foundation. It's more or less a social entrepreneur. And he's going with his team door to door and ask, do you want a green garden? And then 50% says yes. And then we help them. And together with a college, a green college for students who has to do interns, they will help with the maintenance. So all these things together brings our vision nearby, but also awareness. Because when we go door to door, it's not only the greening, but it's also another sector. Now, we ask them if they want to help with the insulation of their houses. So it's really on more levels that we are actually helping with a lot of stakeholders. And it's just a pilot. We're just trying how we can do this and how it works. But so far, it's really, well, the housing corporation is really into this, because it's really, you see already that the people that live there, well, there's a coffee shop in the middle of the square, and where they can get coffee for free and ask questions and things about not only greening and not only by insulating their house, but about all kinds of things, and they can get help. So I think that is a perfect example of how you get all these things together.
Thank you, Ellen. Free coffee helps, but at the same time, good examples from what McKenna was saying. So different stakeholders, sports clubs, citizens, other institutions. And what I've learned from you, it takes a lot of time. You really have to invest it during a long time, building the trust. It doesn't come easily. The audience here in Dordrecht in the Energy House. Remarks, your experiences, questions? I see a hand. You can please stand up, and then Rick also stands up and throws you the catch box. No, then please get the catch box. Yes. There you go. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jannes Willems. I work at the University of Amsterdam, previously also affiliated with BEGIN, so it's nice to be back and see a lot of colleagues here. I want to pick up on the social justice part a bit more, because there's a lot of literature now on green gentrification, for example, and that blue and green infrastructure is not always bringing those benefits to all of us, but it can also lead to displacement, for example, rising property values, and that some groups have to move out of their neighborhood. So it can become a locally invented land use, a LULU in jargon. I'm curious, is this also happening in the cases in the BEGIN partner cities? And could you reflect upon this a bit more? I'm curious to hear some city experiences on this.
Thank you, Jonas. The Lulu. Lien, you know of any examples from your cities? Do you recognize this?
Not immediately. Maybe we're not greening as much already, so we're going to have to deal with it at some point. But I do relate to what Ellen says in the more vulnerable neighborhoods. So in the neighborhoods where there's lots of high educated people, they really group together and ask for more green and blue and climate adaptive measures. But I think it's good to line up with social housing companies and to actually help those people. We also have the Eco House who tries to do sensibilization and who really gives funding and subsidy to people to green their gardens, to green their houses. Most of the time they're not their house owners themselves, so you really have to help them, and then creating awareness is the first step, I think. So, and I hope, I don't know at the time what Jannes says, what we're gonna do, but
Jonas, that's the next level. We're gonna work on gentrification as well. Thank you for this challenge. Sophia, online questions? Still over 200 people?
We have, I cannot see how many people we have. I hope we have 200. Yes, well, there is a question for McKenna, especially for your presentation. So you have a lot of comments. Everyone finds it very interesting. And yeah, we have a question asking if how these points and findings and solutions that you mentioned work across the country. So how do you see the differences there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, this is what I tried to emphasize in the beginning, that definitely one size does not fit all. So there's really a lot of need for adaptation and trials. Right now we have kind of pilot projects within or pilot activities within our research projects where we actually have city-to-city tour groups and exchanges where we're trying to see how some of these instruments, which have worked really well in one context, could be adapted to work in another local context. But I think one of the main things to take into account is really cultural differences in terms of participation. So it's really big differences in terms of how willing civil society is and the general public is to engage in these processes, even if the framework is there from the government side. So I think this is something really to keep in mind, how to make the forums accessible, how to make the types of engagement reachable for those citizens who you're trying to. So also thinking, for example, about vulnerable populations or maybe minority groups, about what time of day you hold the events, or if you do things only online, how to make that accessible for those who don't have access. Also thinking about the level and degree of time commitment, so really making maybe shorter processes so that people have more possibility to participate, these kind of things. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, McKenna. Yeah, it really answers the questions. And yeah, we look forward for your future findings on this because it's very complex and I think it's not solved yet. So we look forward for your work. Yes, I think we have time, we should go to the next speaker, which is also online. And thank you, McKenna, for being here with us. Our next speaker is Paul Sayers. I hope we can have him online right now. Paul is an expert on climate and water management. He has over 20 years of experience and more. He's a strategic advisor on water resilience, and he's a partner on Sayers and Partners, and where they work like on specific challenges and scientific-based research. So, Paul, can you hear us?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And can you see my slides?
Not yet, but maybe you can share your screen. That was the solution before.
I am sharing my screen. It says here, I am sharing my screen. Has it arrived?
Not yet.
It looks to be.
Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for that. And I think hopefully my slides complement a lot what's been said today, which has been really, really good to hear. So we know that obviously flooding is significant across the world, one of the largest climate change challenges we have, both in the North Sea region, obviously, but around the world as well. And the context of this talk is I wondered whether the two words in the conference title, the livable cities and flood resilience around the talk, are they rivals or are they allies? And we know the obvious solutions, or the potential obvious solutions, of wholesale relocation away from the floodplain, may be possible in some small communities, and in the UK there are active discussions around that in some locations, but it's not a practical solution or desirable in many places. So we have to accept that we are going to continue to build on the floodplain. We're going to have huge, already sunk investments in the floodplain, and particularly the urban floodplain. So we can't avoid this combination of livable cities and flood resilient cities. So for example, in some places in England, over 90% of new development and 90% of existing development for a local authority is in the floodplain. And in the Netherlands, it's the same. In Germany, it's the same in many places and also around the world. So my proposition is that flood resilience is a prerequisite for a livable city and not one that is distinct from it. And we know finding and implementing the right solution is not easy, particularly as one of the speakers said earlier, particularly it's no longer reliable to think of the past as some analogy of the future. They're going to be quite different. And again, echoing the thoughts of the speaker earlier, there's no single blueprint for flood resilience. We can't simply transport the approach we use in Copenhagen to Dakar, or from London to Hamburg, or vice versa. They are just distinctly different. But I would say that's not a weakness of the flood resilience concept and the livable city concepts. I would say the resilience framing, that's a strength of it, because it does talk to the context. It does look different in different places. And it also means, just because it's different, it's not a casual approach. It's not a laissez-faire approach. It has real meaning, but it's just not no single blueprint. And we've seen some fantastic examples from the earlier speakers around blue-green infrastructure in action. But the point of this slide is trying to say that resilience may start at home, may start with the individual, may start with the community, understanding your own risks, taking action in your own community, but it doesn't finish there. For long-term flood resilience, well, that really emerges from a whole system of action, where everyone, every scale, has a role in contributing to the future we want, slowing the flow where we can, making space for water where we can, but also defending where we need to. So that includes using the gifts of natural infrastructure within the catchment to manage flood flows that arrive in the city. It also means making green space and reducing runoff, etc. And remembering that a lot of the time, those places aren't in flood. So those green spaces, that natural infrastructure provides amenity biodiversity for 90% of the time where it's not doing its flood role. But I would also say that does not mean that natural infrastructure has to do it all. It's not an either-or question. Conventional infrastructure will play a role, and an important role, and a central role, but in tandem with natural infrastructure. Now, as part of last year's, I thought I'd show a couple of slides around last year's climate change risk assessment that we did for the UK. And this small bar chart is trying to explore the future flood risk through to the 2080s, given, in this case, a 4-degree climate future, and a whole system, what we call a whole system response to adaptation. And the bar charts show the projected adaptation benefit of a particular action. So on the pink on the left, we see the total adaptation benefit, but we also see the contribution different measures as part of that portfolio of responses make to that total adaptation benefit. So here, the grey, we see the conventional infrastructure, the defences, the levees, the embankments. Well, they make a huge difference. But we also see catchment management, natural flood management within the catchment being a major contribution, as well as property level measures and forecasting, and then the residual risks, in this case, being picked up by insurance. And if I showed the same plot on a benefit cost, so what's the benefit cost return for each of those actions as part of that broader portfolio, then catchment management would be up at around between 1 in 15 and 1 in 20 compared to the standard defences of around about 1 in 8. Now, as part of a sister Interreg project, the C5A project, the Cloud to Coast Adaptation Programme, we've been trying to downscale that type of thinking to explore some whole system benefits for Kent, where we've been looking, if you don't know, Kent is down in the southeast of England, a large county with coastal, fluvial and surface water issues. And this plot here is the darker, the orange is showing the urban areas across Kent, so there's quite a few urban areas, urban concentrations. Now I'm just going to show you a couple of initial insights. These are work in progress, but always good to show things hot off the press, I always feel. Now this map is showing the projected increase in risk in expected annual damage terms by 2080s under a 4-degree rise in climate change and a high population growth. And we see significant increases in residential and commercial risks across the county of Kent. Darker the red, the greater the increase. And we looked at how we can manage that through a portfolio of responses, again, including natural flood management, as well as defences, as well as SUDs, urban sustainable drainage, etc. And this plot is showing where the conventional defences, as part of that portfolio, not on their own, but as part of that portfolio, where do they have the most significant role in managing urban flood risks? And we can see they have a significant role. There's many places where they're instrumental in reducing risk.
Paul,
but we also,
may I request you to summarize?
Yes, this is the last. Okay. This is the last. This
Thank
is the last part. Yeah. So this one is just showing how the natural flood management contributes in support of that conventional infrastructure. And again, it's got significant benefits by having that natural flood management response as part of that conventional infrastructure. So, in response to my proposition, I think the answer is yes, it is. They are a prerequisite for it. Resilience is best managed through that whole system of portfolio responses. Remember that natural infrastructure also adapts, and when we think about flood resilience, livable cities look within and beyond the walls of that city for solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, more a water angle presentation, which brings me logically to Magnar Sekse. He's from the City of Bergen, the city in Europe where it rains the most. So fortunately, you haven't brought it yet with you. But also, you've been working for decades as a director for the water agency in Bergen, as long as I know you. You have water plans, all the things being done in Bergen have to incorporate water in some way or form. So maybe you can reflect on this presentation, maybe also your large investment program along Linden. Your reflection from the water perspective.
Thank you, Sebastiaan. A very interesting words from you, Paul. I do very agree in livable cities and flood resilience. They do not compete. My start of my work was to make the city resilient. And that was before we know the word climate adaptation and climate change. We started. But we started to use nature-based solutions in the 80s. And we recognized that nature-based solutions, they were functioning well. They really delivered, and they were more robust than the ordinary traditional systems. I think I also agree very much on there is no blueprint on how to make your own city resilient and livable. You have to know about the water systems, you have to understand the rain, you have to stand the different rain situations to really plan for the right solutions. And I also agree very much on it's not either or, it's both. But when you understand the system, then you can use them in a combination. And now we can see in our city that the city planners, the city architect, they are really going forward and pushing us. And how can we make more blue-green solution, nature-based solution when we are handling the stormwater? And how can we do the city both more resilient and more livable, more beautiful for our citizens? For everyone wants that. And we also see that our politicians, they really have wake up, and they very often as they can, they point on these matters. How can we do this in a smart way? How can we dig up this old creek and give it its space again? Take it into the open city and be part of the city life. And that was what we have done on Linden, which is Bergen is a city between 7 mountains. We are also a peninsula, so we have also the fjords and the sea level rise as a coming challenge. We have taken up more than 1,000 meters of buried channel up to a new creek, a new water system, which is going to give the new part of the city life. We plan for fishing in the new creek, and it's going to be really beautiful, and you will see some of the construction work on the film later on, and it will be finished next year. So I would invite you to come to Bergen and look at how we can do it, and I think this will be a success. And I think we should know our city, we should see what is the possibilities, and we should work hard to reach the possibilities. And I think BEGIN has been an important project for us to really see what possibilities we have in Linden. So come and see, and I think you will be proud to be part of the BEGIN project when you come.
Thank you very much, Sanger. I've been there, and if you actually go to it, they're building a light rail line, and they actually think about the fish alongside, so that's really a new way of thinking. Thank you very much. In view of the time, and we really like to have a very different angle. Sophia, next speaker.
Yes, we would like to invite here on stage Thoms Ivarsson. He's an artist, he's a designer, he works with communities, creating solutions together, and he's a creative director from Rain Gothenburg. So yeah, we want to hear from you. How do you turn rain into an asset and more things? So thank you, Jens.
Thank you very much for having me. So first of all, I would like just to explain what Rain Gothenburg is. That Gothenburg turns 400 years this year, actually. So we're 200 years behind, but still. And the thing is that we asked all the citizens, what do they want when we turn 400 years? So one thing was that they said, you know, maybe we can come closer to the water and maybe do something about the weather, you know, the fact that it rains quite a lot. And the thing is that we created then this project, you can call it Rain Gothenburg, and we have the vision of, you know, creating the best city in the world when it rains. William, who just ran out with his phone, first time when I said this to him, he said, you better get in line. He worked then in Rotterdam. And of course, we take this very serious, but we actually aim to be the best city in the world when it rains. And also, I'm a designer, and we use the design method, the way of thinking, and that is to really try to find creative and new solutions for problems or challenges. And that is by asking questions, you know, why is it like this, why it is like that, and then finding the main function. What problem are we really trying to solve here? So I kind of start my presentation with this picture. I took it at the harbor in Gothenburg, and there's a long bench where it says, everybody loves the sunshine. I'm one of them. I also love sunshine. I think most people do. But in Gothenburg, as most other cities, we have our fair share of rain. Not as much as Bergen, but still we have about almost 40% of the year it rains. And also, if looking at that as an asset, it's a possibility that you can actually turn that into something good. And how we can do that, I would just very quickly go through that with you. And also due to climate change that we're talking about, is that it's not only, some people ask, what do you do when it's not raining, or you know, vacation? But of course, it's about drought. We know how it rains more and more in the future. So we need to deal with the rain in a clever way so we can deal with the drought. So that's really important. And also, good to remember that rain is actually part of having clean drinking water. And that is something we should celebrate, this part of the world. There is plenty of places in the world where you don't have access to clean drinking water. So we really also want to acknowledge that and celebrate that through different areas, as you can see on this slide, in, you know, nice colors, all these, you know, good words. But actually we added those words once we worked within that field. So we're adding on more and more. So we gathered in all this into three main areas. First of all, as a designer, you look at the human first. What does it mean to be a human being in a city when it rains? And then handling rain, of course, is what we heard a lot about today. Very, you know, technical and practical and all those things. And that's why we also add a creative method, because we know that we need to do a more resilient city, but also for humans. So let's start with the human. This fantastic picture is taken by a photographer, Agneta Delefors in Gothenburg. And when I spoke to her, I asked her, you know, did you Photoshop in that T-shirt on him? It says, I love Gothenburg on his T-shirt. The only one who is, you know, challenging the rain. But she said, no, that was a true picture. But it is interesting, if you look at it also, what are the other people doing? Where do they stand? They stand where there is a little bit of dry space, you know? And you do these kind of last-minute solutions if there is nothing prepared for you. You do these things. And for me as an artist, when I look at this, if we want to celebrate and acknowledge rain, what would it sound like to be in this party? How would it feel when you are warm and dry and you experience something that is wet and cold? You get a very strong sensation that you can use as something positive. Here is a picture of a rain playground that we have. This was the first one. The second one, Malin will show a little bit later. But this is the only difference between this playground and all the other ones, is that there you have some kind of roof that you can also collect the rainwater and lead it to some place where the children can play with it. Because children likes rain. It's us parents that wants to go in when it rains. And also this one, talking about, you know, challenges within a city. This is the first one. It's the most exclusive place, area in Gothenburg. We in Rain Gothenburg are trying to push the city to have at least 30% of the playgrounds should be rain-proof. That you want to go there when it rains, because it's a, human right for kids to go outside and play. So, then the second part is handling rain. And all this is, of course, very technical and practical, as we know. And for me, as a designer, when I started working 4.5 years ago with this, I didn't know the difference between a normal rain and a cloudburst. And I learned that. And when I meet citizens and other people, they don't know that either. So this is important if we want engagement. We need to communicate in a way that people understand. And the solution for all this is what we heard today already. And this is something we want too, blue and green solutions. So it adds a value even if it's not raining, as you can see on these pictures. In Gothenburg so far, we don't have much of this. That's what Rain Gothenburg is trying to convince our own city to do more of this. So we add the third, the creative method. Because talking about communication, most things that we do is about communication. And usually we only make our presentations and when we talk about reason, facts, numbers and all those things. But we have another 3 ways of communicating. We have, of course, our brain is reason, heart, feeling, stomach, intuition, and our crouch, lust. That's quite important to understand. Even though working with rain, how can we use that? So that is why we use artists, for example, to do different things with rain color or different things just to make people interested, to feel something about rain. Then we can, after a while, we can start adding the information. It's easier to get people's ears to listen. This is an example that we're working with now for 3 years, adding poets that they do the poem on manhole lids that were casted and placed out in all over the city. And here is almost the final picture. There's one more. This is just a picture of what is going on that will be ready in 2 years. It's a school where they took the vision of Rain Gothenburg, which is to become the best city in the world when it rains. And the architects wanted to, together with the engineers and technicians, to create the best school in the world when it rains. So what that means is that they are looking at the architecture. How can we use the fact that when it rains, we can use that water for art, for experiences, for also teaching the children. And there should be places outside in the playground that you can go if you want to be dry when it rains. So when it rains outside, you can do that and you can play with the rain in different ways. And also, this is the final picture. I think it's good, though, to also go back to the brain and actually learn something. You know, the raindrops that we have beautifully, I saw in Dordrecht now, it's really raining outside, great. The raindrops, the shape of a raindrop, you know, this shape that is drawn has never existed and will never exist. Raindrops actually look like this when they fall. And I think that's nice to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens, and compliments to the City of Gothenburg to bring in an artist and designer. We actually, as a project, tried the same thing when we went to Interreg North Sea region program. We thought we have to come up with something new, also in climate and water. We have to think differently, so we invited the Royal College of Arts, another artist, and it's been quite an experience for us to learn a lot as myself, I'm an engineer. Ellen, City of Dordrecht, you've worked with Jens, and you're also trying to use a creative method. Maybe you can reflect from your practice?
Yeah, well, I never made a secret of it that I'm very inspired by what Jens is telling and doing. We only had the opportunity for once to have a city-to-city workshop in Dordrecht. It was about the Stadspark XXL. And, well, that was very, well, that's not much, but he said you have to think about what you need for that park, that every citizen of Dordrecht want to go there once a week. And that only was very interesting, and that helps me enormously to think about that. And we asked different groups already what they want, and after that we just make the vision. And the things we put in, just to suggest, because it's not done yet, that helps to make that vision, I think. And actually I'm really looking forward in working with Jens and Gothenburg in this way.
That's something I would like to mention as well, is that we talked about, and we see in the presentation also how important it is with parks and recreation places and all that. And we're in Sweden and north of Europe, but still here and in Sweden we have, you know, end of October, all the green solution turn brown and gray because the leaves fall off. So we have all of November, December, January, February, March, and a bit into April, and it starts to get a little green again. So, and it's also dark during that period, and it's also a lot of rain and cold. So if we can turn that into something that actually feels a little bit better for us as humans, at the same time we do more resilient cities, we really gain a lot of value. And as we heard earlier, that the pandemic showed us that the need to go more outside to meet in public spaces. Well, we need to do that even on days like this. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jens. Anybody from the audience for Jens or for Antwerp, Bergen or Dordrecht? No? Anyone online before we...
We had a nice comment. Now I cannot see the chat right now in my screen, but it was saying like we should not wait for the storm to stop. It's a nice quote, but we should dance with it. So
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
So we should, yeah, an inspirational comment.
Okay, well, dancing. If you would like to dance, we're approaching our coffee break. So if you can either have coffee or dance in the rain outside, as I understand it's raining here. Also for you online, before you leave, some instructions. There'll be workshops in different rooms inside these buildings. You will get guided through them, through the building. You have signed up for certain workshops. There'll be 4 workshops, the same for the people online. They'll be on nature-based solutions with slightly different angles. So nature-based solutions and climate adaptation. The other one will be on people and society, where we go into engagement of people together with nature-based solutions. Thirdly, health and well-being, so the relation between health and well-being and nature-based solutions. And finally, the multifunctionality and multiple benefits. Those are the 4 workshops. You're invited to go to, again, there's professional facilitators, there'll be cities there, there'll be videos of what the cities all have been doing. So I invite you to go to your workshop. Before that, also after that, at 2 o'clock, we come back here, and then we start building new projects. So also people online, you get pitches from people who have project ideas and would like to work with you, or looking for partners, or like to brainstorm and articulate better what they want to do. But also we learn about funding opportunities. We will have online the head of the new Interreg North Sea region program explaining the new program and funding opportunities, and we have the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs, their advisor for various other European funding programs. So you learn a bit where these opportunities lie, and for us here in the room it will be more informal because we go out in different groups and we can basically network there. Talking about networking, right now is the coffee break. Anything online, Sophie, anything we missed?
No, I think we're fine.
We're good?
Keep chatting online when we have the sessions, interacting, sending our questions, when we have plenary, so we look forward to these interactions.
So at 11 o'clock, you're expected, if you're in this building, in one of the workshop rooms, online, be back at 11. We'll start 11 o'clock sharp, and you'll be immediately in a workshop room, not anymore in this plenary room where we will facilitate. We will be back in this big room at 2 o'clock and with you online. Enjoy your coffee breaks. Thank you.